I know it's been a while since I've talked to you about my book. My book being the book that I wrote that's coming out this year. So I'm here with some updates and to answer some questions. So after I turned in the final edit revision to the editor several months ago, it went to the proofreader. And it's been in queue with the proofreader since then. And Falstaff Publishing has a lot of books coming out this year. Dozens and dozens of books. So it's just a matter of them getting to mine. And then it will be done. And after the proofreading stage, there's nothing left to do except the cover and pre-order stage and marketing, and then it will be out. And they've told me that the goal is to have it out and ready for Monsterama, which is a con. And it happens in Atlanta on October 4th. The way my publisher likes to work is to launch new releases at cons because they have a really great con presence. They travel around to cons all over the South and also in other locations in the country as well, but mostly the South. So if you're in this neck of the woods and you're at a local comic book con, literary focus con, horror con, keep your eye out for Falstaff Books because they have a big table full of books, and soon mine will be there too after October 4th. And any cons that are happening after October 4th, like Atomicon in Charleston, South Carolina, and all those winter cons, my book will be available there too. I won't be at Monsterama that I know of. That may change. I could make some last minute plans. But currently I'm not planning to be there. But if you do want to see me and have me sign your book or something, and you're in the general area, there will be events in Charlotte, North Carolina, where that could happen. And I will give you all the details of whatever those wind up being as soon as I have them. So good news, the publisher is letting me keep my title. The title that I've had for this book since I first came up with the idea in 2010, which is The Company of Death. I always love the title because it has several different meanings that I can't tell you all of them because spoilers, but the main one is that Death himself is the main character or a main character in the story, and he has friends, so they're his company. And it's sort of like a play on the term, I prefer the company of men, or I prefer the company of women. I prefer the company of death, because, who doesn't? So yeah, October 4th, it will be officially out. Maybe slightly before then, it's still in the works, but that's the goal. And that will be for print and ebook. Print, I've been told, will be hardback and paperback. And I know everyone's going to ask me about audio. That comes down the line because when you've got a small indie press like Falstaff Books, the way that they do audio is through a third party. So once the book is complete, then they start shopping for the audio narrator and all that happens, and that takes several months. So I've been told 2019 is when you can look for that. Sorry, I know everyone who wants audio will want it right away, but hopefully it'll be worth the wait. So I asked you on Twitter if you had any questions about my book or my writing in general that I could answer for you, and boy, did you! I got so many questions. Sorry, I won't be able to answer them all. If I didn't answer your question, I'm really sorry. But I tried to get to the most relevant ones, and some of them were kind of similar, so if one was like another, then I'm just answering one of them. First, let me just tell you what the book's about. I know I've told you a bit what it's about, but more like a plot summary. So, here's the hard part. Why is talking about your own book so hard? So what's your book about? Stuff and things and relationships and stuff. Okay, so it's been 2 years since the zombie apocalypse happened, and this is happening in a near future. I left the time ambiguous for reasons, say 50 or so years in our future in America, but the zombie apocalypse has happened all over the world. And the vampires who have always existed in our world, unbeknownst to humans, have decided that since the zombie apocalypse is happening, the best thing they can do is round up as many humans as they can and keep them kind of like cattle herds. So the vampires are doing this, and some humans go into these herds for protection, some are forced into it, but the rest of the humans think that this isn't a good system, and they want to stop that because if everyone gets rounded up into cattle herds and no one's out there fighting the zombies, and then the world's gonna fall apart. So they would rather have all the humans free and fighting zombies than huddled up with vampire herds. So there's a group of people who go out and fight these vampires and try to destroy these herds and get the people safe and take them back. And the protagonist, Emily, works for one of these groups. So the book starts out with her on a mission to go do this thing and destroy the vampires, and nothing goes the way she planned, and she winds up on a journey not with any of those people. She's in a situation where she knows she's going to get bitten by a zombie or turn into a vampire, and she does not want that to happen, so she decides she's going to kill herself before she lets that happen. So death comes to her. Death, the Grim Reaper, the actual embodiment of death. But before he can take her life, something horrible happens, and Emily winds up sort of caught in a state between life and death. And at the same time, Death loses his powers. And the two of them are stranded together in the middle of nowhere in these states they've never known before. So Emily wants to get cured. She wants to become human again. Death wants his powers back. So they decide to work together, and the only way they can get what they want is to cross from California to New York City over a zombie-ravaged wasteland of America. So it's a road trip novel. And along the way, they join up with a human, his robot bodyguard, and a vampire who has ulterior motives that they don't know about. So that's why people keep comparing it to Wizard of Oz, even though I didn't have that in mind when I did it, but it's sort of like the Cowardly Lion, the Tin Man, and all of that, and I can see it. So now that you know the gist of it, on to your questions. When can we pre-order? I've been told mid-September, essentially a couple weeks before the book comes out. The publisher doesn't like to do a long pre-order period because unlike New York published books, the pre-orders actually don't help out in that sense of making it onto a bestseller list. That doesn't really matter. The publisher does a lot through Amazon, so I know that there's a lot of controversy with supporting Amazon, but that's where this is for me. So if you do want to help me and pre-order, you'll be able to pre-order on Amazon the ebook or the paperback or the hardback mid-September-ish, towards the end of September. And I will definitely be sharing all those links. So keep your eye on my Twitter, on my Facebook, on my Patreon, on this channel, because I'll make another video and let you know. Oh, and if you are a book blogger or a book reviewer and you would like a review copy of my book because you're going to essentially give me free advertising, reach out to me, talk to me. It would be an ebook review copy. It wouldn't be a physical copy. So if you only do physical copies, sorry, I can't help you, but I can work with the publisher to get ebook review copies. So send me a DM through Twitter or email me, mavenoftheeventide@gmail.com, or leave a comment here and I'll try to get back to you through YouTube or through my Patreon, private messaging there. YouTube doesn't let you do private messaging anymore. Do you have cover art or will it be done competition style? Competition style, I think you're talking about the Awoken contest, if I had to guess. No, I have a copy of, yeah, I always keep a copy of Awoken within reach. No, I don't. It's just when I'm sitting here. So this wonderful cover art, which is by Ariel Johnson, who is a wonderful person who used to watch our Booze Your Own Adventure show, won a contest. And I self-published Awoken. When Lindsay and Nella and I and our ghostwriters wrote it, I was the one who did all the self-publishing. I formatted it. I got it up on the internet on all the platforms. And we hired this cover artist, and she did the art here, and she also like formatted the text and stuff, and she did all this stuff. She was wonderful. And we held a contest and asked you people watching us to submit your cover art designs, and then we had people vote, and then we kind of narrowed it down to finalists, and then Lindsay, Nella, and I chose the final cover design, and that was a contest. If that's not what you're talking about, sorry, but that is not how Company of Death's cover will be handled. The publisher will provide the cover art. They have in-house art designers and cover artists, and sometimes they also work with other companies to provide it, but I think one of the in-house designers will be handling mine. And I will be able to work with them and offer suggestions, and they're not going to make a cover that I hate. They're going to work with me, you know, within reason of what they think is good for their company. They want to make a cover that they think will sell books. So if my idea is not something that they think will make them money, they're not going to use my idea. But I'm sure it'll be something I like. My biggest hope is that the Grim Reaper will be on the cover, because I know that whenever I go into a bookstore and I see a book with the Grim Reaper on the cover, I'm like, give me, it must be mine. So that's my request, but we'll see what they do. I'm sure it'll be amazing. And I think once the cover is done, it will be out there ready for pre-order and stuff, because this publisher puts things out when they're done. They don't hold them back or hold on to them. They get their books out there. So the fact that my book's not out yet means it's not done yet because it's still in the proofreading stage. So once the cover's done, once it's formatted, once they have it up on all the platforms, once they do all that web work, we're gonna try to have a little time to promote it, but they're not gonna take a lot of time to do that because, again, with small presses, it's not the same situation you would get with needing months to promote it and get those reviews in and all of that. So they just get it out as soon as they can, which means in time for Monsterama, which means in time for Halloween, which makes me very happy because my book will be out there full of monsters in time for the spookiest holiday. Do you have any plans of releasing your book internationally? Well, you'll be able to order it online the same way that you can order Awoken online. I mean, the same way you can order pretty much any book online through Amazon or Barnes & Noble or whatever your local country's major bookseller is. It's not going to be in physical stores internationally unless you have independent booksellers in your area and you request them to stock it. But anywhere you live in the world, if you can sign online, you can order it and have it shipped to you. Or read the ebook if you like those. That makes it really easy. What is your book like in terms of narrative style and or main themes? Well, it's a hero's journey. Emily gets set on this path, on this journey with a goal in mind, but, learns a little bit about herself along the way. Friends become enemies, enemies become friends, so on and so forth. And the first book is a very 3-act structure. After the first act, she's launched into a whole new world and she can never go back. And the end of the second act is the worst thing that's ever happened to her and she thinks she can never get past it. And the third act, she figures something out and she has a whole new set of priorities now and a new plan. But also the 3 books in this series are sort of a 3-act structure. And originally, as I've mentioned before, it was one giant book that I split into 3 and then I reworked it to make it feel like a single book. But what makes up book 1 is kind of an act 1 because at the end of the book 1, they're in a new situation, things are different, the fellowship has formed, kind of, to put in Lord of the Rings terms. And then book 2 is a lot of the road trip where you have all the main characters on this journey together and a whole bunch of stuff happens. So there's the 5 main characters. Emily, who's caught between life and death, Death himself, a human, a vampire, and a robot. And Emily, the human, and the vampire are all point of view characters, and the book switches between their points of view. Emily, for the most part, and then the other 2 are supplementary, so more chapters are from Emily's points of view than their points of view, but after they get introduced, it does kind of like flip back and forth between them. The vampire only has points of view chapters at night, so naturally he's kind of in it less during the day hours. He's not able to narrate anything. Let me tell you, writing from 3 different points of view, it's a lot of work. 3 different voices. I had to make them not sound like each other. The main themes are learning that things aren't black and white, I guess. Figuring out the gray areas between good and evil, the gray areas of relationships. Things aren't always either platonic or romantic. There's like an in-between there. And the gray areas of friendships. And I kind of, I guess without realizing it, represented this metaphorically in the gray areas between life and death, because you have things that are definitely alive, like the human, things that are definitely dead, like Death himself, the robot, which has never been alive, but pretty much acts like she is, like she feels like she could be. She's an android in the sense of like Bender or like C-3PO or like Data. She doesn't look like any of those, but that kind of level of artificial intelligence. Then you have things like the vampire, who's undead. And so you have all these different areas between life and death, and those wound up being a representation for those gray areas in morality and life. What, that isn't a spoiler, are you most excited to see people's reactions to? I.e. plot, characters, in a general sort of way. I can't help but be curious what you feel the most eager to be responded to as a fellow writer. The characters, I guess, their dysfunctional relationships and how they grow together as a group. And I guess I'm really excited to see if people pick up on all the underlying stuff that goes into their personalities and their like emotional damage. If people were to write meta about their like psychologies, that would be amazing. Or fan art. I love fan art. People have drawn pictures of my characters for other stories I've written in the past, and it is always the best thing. Because you do a lot of deep psychoanalysis on your characters to figure out where they're coming from and why they react to certain things a certain way and their issues with their upbringing and how their parents mess them up and how they try to correct that or whether they don't and whether they become bad people. But you can't put that in the book. You can't put that on the page. So all of that work is going into figuring out your characters, and you really want to share it with people, but you can't because nobody wants to read about that. That's like special features, extra stuff. But if people are able to get that out of the subtext that I wrote or out of the way the characters act and respond, that would be really exciting to me. Was it difficult balancing writing your book, making your videos, and looking after your son, or was it manageable? No. I could not have done that. My son is in full-time daycare, which my Patreon pays for. I literally make videos to put him in daycare so that I can make videos. Fortunately, I am not in a single income household, so I have the privilege to be able to do that. And, my partner does pretty well with his job, so he's able to support me and my son in other ways. But if I had to look after my son full time, I would not be able to make videos. I would not be able to write. When I used to work full time at my day job, and my son was also in daycare, it wasn't like I would go home and write in the evenings because, then I'm taking care of my child or I'm spending time with my family. And I didn't have the mental, emotional capacity to also do writing. I know some people can do that, and that's amazing, but I personally couldn't. So that's why this book took so long to write. Because after my family situation changed, I stopped working on it for a long time. I told you that I first came up with the idea for this book in 2010. I haven't been writing it for 8 years. I mean, obviously, I finished it 2 years ago when I started the whole publication process. So I wasn't writing it for 6 years either. There was like a 3 to 4 year break in there where I couldn't really work on it that much at all. Now I'm in a wonderful situation where I'm able to make videos to support my writing lifestyle, essentially. And I have a wonderful school where my kid is learning all kinds of wonderful things and he's getting smarter by the day. But it's thanks to Patreon that I'm able to do that. And also I do freelance work. I do freelance editing as a source of income. And I work for Lindsay and she provides part of my income. So between all that, I'm able to afford the full-time daycare as well as, food and stuff and socks for my baby. So when I'm working on all those things that are producing the money, like the videos and the stuff for Lindsay and the freelance stuff, that usually takes bulk about 2 weeks a month to get all that done. So I really only have about a week a month to spend on writing. And I try to space that out so it's not like 1 solid week here and 2.5 solid weeks here and then the week of miscellaneous travel or whatever. Usually it's a day of this here, a day of this there. And balancing that, I'm pretty good at. I'm very good at staying organized and making a schedule and keeping to my schedule, unless I get sick or we have a lot of travel or something. But I guess I can only spend about a week a month writing. And I'm kind of a slow writer already because I'm very meticulous, very focused on details, very organized and very planning. I don't just sit down and write and let it out. So writing is slow for me. So I've got these 3 books plus another book that's totally separate that I just finished. That's 4 books in my lifetime so far. There are authors my age that have written 30, 40 books, but everyone is different. Write what you can write the way you can write it. I was not able to start writing until I quit my day job to be a writer and a video maker. But it's not like I'm just sitting around writing all day. It's still a lot of work. So if you're having trouble squeezing writing in, more power to you. Do what you can because what you're doing is amazing. And even if it takes you 8 years or longer, you will get there and it will be worth it. What was your biggest inspiration in writing this book? Well, subconsciously, Zombieland. Consciously, Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles and Phantom of the Opera. Everything I write is kind of influenced by Phantom of the Opera. You may not be able to tell if you don't know Phantom that well, but if you're a super Phantom fan, you'll pick up on it. Also, death and the maiden in general, that whole motif / trope. Only in my book's not a Beauty and the Beast story, so I made the maiden also a monster. For the androids, definitely the robots from Gargoyles were a big influence. You know, the ones that have like the laser beams on their arms and they're shooting and flying around. Though my robots don't look like gargoyles. They look kind of... I guess I was inspired by the Svedka robot for the main android. Her name is Carol. And except she's a little more practical. She wears sensible shoes. She's more realistic. Like kind of a combination between the Svedka robot and the robots from the iRobot movie. For the zombies, what I wanted to do with this book was kind of take all these monster tropes, like not new twists on monsters, but classic conceptions of monsters. So you have the zombies like the Night of the Living Dead, slow zombies, and then you have the zombies that are really scary and really fast. And so I have multiple kinds of zombies. And then the vampires were very much that classic Anne Rice style of vampire. They don't have a lot of the same things. Like there's some things that are the same, but definitely a lot that's different. But I'm not trying to make them fresh or new. I'm taking these common pop culture ideas and putting them in a blender and doing something, I think, interesting with them. Will it feature any LGBTQ plus characters? Yes. Okay, so there's 5 main characters, right? Emily, the protagonist, is biromantic asexual, like me, which I didn't actually realize when I was writing it originally, because that was I actually started writing this before I really even fully understood my own sexuality, but there's a lot of me in her. There's also a lot of a certain friend in her that I was inspired by for her, and my sexuality wound up being hers. So she is biromantic and asexual. It's not a romance story. There's no real romance in it. I mean, there's relationships, but it doesn't really come up. But I'm all for stories that have queer characters that aren't about their queerness, that they're just incidentally queer. So yeah, Emily is biromantic asexual. Death is like super pan, the panest of all pans, because he's Death and he's into absolutely everybody. He is male in this book because the way he works is that he appears as he's perceived to appear. And when he appears, it takes Emily's life. She perceives him as male, and so he's male. But he can also be female or non-binary or pretty much anything. But throughout the course of this book, he's male. And the vampire, whose name is Leif, he is bi, because I always write bi vampires. Like, if I write a vampire who's not bi, you should be shocked. I just feel like when you become a vampire, everyone is delicious. So you're gonna want to eat them, no matter what they are. Carol, the android, is also bi, I guess. I mean, she's an android, so she is programmed to love. She can fall in love, but she doesn't have hormones or anything, so I guess that also makes her kind of asexual in a way. But she does fall in love with both men and women, at least in this story. The human, whose name is Scott, is my token straight white cis man, so he is not. I put one of those in the story on purpose, the same way I put George Romero zombies in the story on purpose. Like, it was one of those things that I wanted to have for my whole monster mash. For supporting characters, Scott's sister, who isn't physically present, but there's flashbacks with her, she's gay, she's lesbian, and her assistant is also gay and totally in love with the sister, but she's oblivious, so that's angsty. One of Emily's teammates at the beginning of the book that she talks to and has an important conversation with is gay, and he is mourning his boyfriend, who he lost in like a zombie battle. And funny story, I was at a writer's group, and it was kind of a new writer's group. I didn't know the people there very well, and I took the first couple chapters to it, and they read it. So they read the chapter where Emily was introduced, and it was made clear that she was bi. At least it hadn't gotten to the ace part yet. And then the chapter where she talks to this other guy who's mourning his boyfriend. And someone in that writer's group's feedback was, I think it's cool that you have Emily be the way she is, but when you get to the next guy and he's that way too, it's too much. It's unrealistic. Like, gay people aren't that much in the world, and it would make more sense if he was mourning his brother or something. Like, you might as well make it his brother. It doesn't really matter to the plot that he's gay or that it's boyfriend. It would be more realistic. Because there are just, gay people are so few and far between that to have 2 in 2 chapters, it's just, I don't buy it. And I wasn't allowed to respond to this feedback because it was like a silent receiving writers group, but I'm just thinking like, oh, honey, don't you know we flock together? And also, 20% of millennials identified as LGBT plus. 20%. Yeah, so if you've got a team of 10, 2 are going to be gay, and this is a team of like 30. So, yeah. And they flock together. So, there's more. And why not? It's my story. I want it. Will you have any POCs? So, Emily is mixed race. Her mother is half Filipina, which I based her ethnicity, kind of inspired by my cousins. My aunt is from the Philippines, and also on some friends I grew up with. And no one's really asked me why I made her a woman of color instead of just white like me. But I've been sort of preparing my answer in case they do, because first of all, why not? It's like when you ask a man why he wrote a woman. Why not? People exist. People of color who are biromantic asexuals exist. I was inspired by a friend, and I wanted to see that friend in this story, and also my cousins. And I grew up in Southern California, which is where Emily's from, and we have a pretty big Filipino population. I think Tagalog is the 3rd most spoken language in California. So, it's realistic, it happens, and it builds into her personality in a way that does factor into the story and does factor into her whole, way she reacts to things and stuff. So it matters. That being said, as a white woman, you should read stories by authors of color. Don't come to white people to write people of color. Go read stories by authors of color. And when you're done reading those, then come read my story just because it's a story, not because I wrote a person of color and that deserves any kind of special attention. Stories of the struggles of people who aren't white are not my story to tell. I wrote a story about a woman who deals with a lot of stuff that I've dealt with in my life, but also a lot of stuff that I haven't even touched. And I did my research, and I talked to my friends, and I got a lot of input to try to make her life as authentic as possible. So I hope I did all right. I guess my main reason for writing her this way was, why not? Scott and Leaf are white. Death is a skeleton. And Scott's sister is white. But most of the people on Emily's team that are in the first third of the book are people of color, actually. I think there's only one named character in that group that's white, and the rest they were actually based mostly on people I worked with. And I worked in New York City, where it's a very diverse environment. So as a manager of a retail store and also a manager of a Starbucks, I've managed a lot of things. A lot of my staff were very diverse, so each person on Emily's team is either based on someone I went to school with or someone I worked with once, for better or for worse. Some really good friends and some people that couldn't stand me as their boss. When writing, do you envision real people like actors, etc. as your characters? If so, who? No, not actors. Friends. A lot of times I'll base people on friends, or I will name characters after friends, but try to not make them too much like my friends, so my friend's not like, why am I in your story? So there'll be little things from that friend, but as far as looks go, not usually. I did try afterwards to find people that I thought looked kind of like my characters. I haven't done it for most of them. I do describe my characters, so if you think I describe them looking like someone you think, tell me, and I'll be like, yes, that's a good headcanon, or like, no, you're way off. But for Emily, Vanessa Hudgens is kind of like what I have in mind, except Emily doesn't look like a gorgeous movie star, but that sort of skin tone and face shape and everything works for her, and I think she's about the right age now. Death is based more off some fictional characters that I'm a big fan of. He's like an amalgamation of my favorite fictional characters into the embodiment of death, but not real people. I've never really been into actors or people as sort of visual targets or sources of attraction. I've always been much more into fictional characters. Actually, come to think of it, the vampires are kind of based on that too, but you'll probably be able to see that yourself when you read it. Which physical depiction of death do you feel most closely matches the look and or feel of your death? Well, he is a skeleton in a big black cloak. Very classic, cliche Grim Reaper as you can get. I have the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse in the story, but I didn't want them based on like the Christian 4 horsemen of the apocalypse that you actually read about in Revelations. They are based very much on the pop culture notion of what they are, because the idea of me pulling all these monsters together into this book came from pop culture ideas. And I don't like the thought of being like, well, that's not accurate. Technically, it should be this. And, technically, if you look at the history and the lore, it's not pestilence, it's conquest. And death carries a sword, not a scythe. Like, yeah, but that's not the book I'm writing. Here are some pictures I found on Google that fit with what I had in mind. As far as the feel of my death, he's not that serious. Like, he's kind of a chill guy. Like, he's serious about some things, but he doesn't take himself too seriously at all. So he is, like I said, based on some fictional characters I like. Yes, Phantom of the Opera is one of them. So if you ever read any of my Phantom of the Opera fan fiction, you might notice a lot of it is very similar to my death. If you haven't read my Phantom of the Opera fan fiction, it does still exist on the internet. I stand by it. Have you ever had to endure the anyone could write this better syndrome? If so, how did you overcome it? I've wanted to write a lot of my own ideas this past few years, but every time I start, I get this nagging little voice preventing me of doing any real progress. I mean, yes, especially since it's taken me so long to write this book. I've seen things come out since I started it that I'm like, that's so similar to mine and it's better and why should I even bother? But it's still not my book. Only I can write my book. Only you can write your ideas. Just do it. And you'll get better the more you do it. And you're not going to get better and get as good as those things that are better than yours if you don't do it. Work, practice, strive. Giving up before you start isn't going to do anything. I mean, there is nothing wrong with being a consumer. You don't have to be the person writing the stories and creating. You can be a fully enthusiastic reader, enjoying things that exist. But if you've got stories in you that you want to get out there in the world, go for it. You are good enough, and you will be good enough. And working and writing and putting them down is what will get you there. So even if no one else ever reads it, by the time you get to the point where people are reading what you're writing, it will be worth it. Do you sometimes refer to past supernatural lore when writing your book's lore, and or do you get flexible with that lore? Lack as in, do you stray away from certain aspects of typical monster mythos? Well, for death and the other sort of celestial beings, I did look a lot to Greek myths. I've always been a big fan of Greek myths. So death is a lot connected to the Greek Thanatos, like darkness and night are his parents, and sleep is his twin brother. But for the vampires, like I said, I am very much inspired by Anne Rice. As you know, she's my favorite. She does a lot of things with her vampires, like they have like telekinetic powers, and they can fly, and they can set things on fire, and they can astral project out of their bodies, and they're descended from aliens. I don't do any of that. But I do similar things like crosses don't affect my vampires, mirrors don't affect them, they can cross running water, they don't have to be invited into houses, none of that very superstitious or Christian connected stuff. The only thing my vampires have that are very connected to lore is being creatures of the night. Dracula could go out during the day, my vampires can't. My vampires are completely non-functional during the day. They couldn't get up if they wanted to. They do need to be in light, tight spaces. If sunlight touches them, they're not happy. I won't tell you what happens because that's kind of a spoiler. They have to drink blood to survive. If they don't, they're also very unhappy, and that can cause problems. For the zombies eat human flesh. They don't eat brains, but they do eat human flesh, and they only eat live humans. So after they get to the point of eating a human where the humans turn into a zombie, they would stop eating that human. They don't eat animals. I don't have like zombie animals running around. This is all still very pop culture inspired. I didn't really look to ancient vampire myths or ancient African zombie myths or anything like that. There's homage to it, but I stuck with the pop culture notions because those are the things that manifest in the world that I wanted to examine. In that, what has our world come to in the ideas of these creatures? We don't still treat zombies and vampires the way they were treated 200 years ago. We treat them this way now, and 50 years in the future, even more so. But for Death himself, and also Time as a character, those mostly Greek, but also I just kind of made stuff up. It's kind of the sense of like, death has always existed. And the ancient Greeks interpreted him this way, and they got some things right about it. But other cultures interpreted him this way, and they got some things right too. And death will adapt himself to cultures in a pop culture sense, even back then, to be what the people experience him as. So death is all those things in all those different ways. He's death. He's kind of like this dark black cloud that takes shape into the physical manifestation. And that's why he's the Grim Reaper in this, because in this contemporary setting, that is how Emily perceives the embodiment of death when he appears for her. My androids are not bound to Asimov's rules of robotics, because I think they're silly. They are metal bodies with artificial intelligence, and they have the limitations of that, but it is very advanced artificial intelligence. They have free range of personality. They can be controlled by humans, but the main one isn't for the most part. So she's a completely autonomous, free-thinking intelligence who kind of might as well be human, but of course she's not. Of course she's different, and of course that matters. What were some of the challenges you faced when planning and writing this book? What helped you to overcome them? Well, the biggest one was that the story was too huge. We're talking like bigger than Lord of the Rings huge. And a friend gave me the idea to split it up, which I was like, that's brilliant. Why didn't I think of that? So reworking this first book so far, and then the plans for the other two books to make it feel like a complete book, that was a challenge. How did I overcome that? I just worked hard. Talking to friends helped, beta readers, brainstorming with my friends. I could not have done this without all my writers groups. They give me the best ideas to steal. Also, having 5 main characters is kind of hard. Figuring out one main character is hard enough. Originally, I planned to have all 5 of them have points of view, and I cut it down to 3. I decided that Death and the robot wouldn't have points of view because they're not real, essentially, so we wouldn't get their points of view. So only the 3 who are human or once were human, the vampire, the human, and Emily, who's between life and death. For the first book, what is now chapter 9 was originally chapter 1, and I think the current chapter 13 was chapter 2. So you can see I added a lot of stuff in there. And I also, it used to be a lot shallower because I was doing this sort of pop culture breakdown examination, making fun of thing, and I come from a theater background, so I also wrote it a lot like a screenplay. I was just putting actions on the page and letting those actions speak to what the characters were feeling and thinking, but that's not very effective for novel writing. And one of the feedback I got was, show me what's going on inside the character's head. Don't tell me what's going on in their head, but I need some interiority. So adding that in was a challenge, and I had to learn how to do that because I had never done that before. This isn't the first novel I've ever written, but it's probably the one where I learned the most as far as how to make a novel a novel. And I read a lot of books, and I went to some workshops, and I worked with a lot of friends. So I made something that felt kind of shallow into something much deeper. Also, for this first book, tying the ending climax scene into the beginning part of the novel was something that Lindsay actually helped me with. And talking to her, I got the idea to make those 2 parts connect instead of it just being like, we have this whole situation before Emily goes on her journey and then it's just gone and it never comes back. Now, the emotional connection to that comes back, and I feel like it gives the climax a lot more depth. But that took a lot of work to figure out how to do and all the rewriting to make it happen. How did the editing process go once you finished your first draft? Did you have to cut out anything you wish you'd kept, or find any hidden gems you could elaborate further on in the subsequent drafts? Did you query for an agent? And if so, how was that process? So besides all I just said with having to add all that in, I didn't cut out that much. The main thing was fleshing this first third of a book out into a full book itself. There were some parts that I wrote from Death's point of view that obviously got cut, but they're still essentially in there in that he tells them to Emily. And so from her point of view, we hear them. There's a conversation he has with Time that is now completely cut, but it wasn't a very good conversation, so I don't regret it. Anything that cut out, I'm glad it got cut out. The book's about 90,000 words, which is pretty average, maybe even a little short for something that's sci-fi fantasy, so it's a good length. It's a very digestible length. Querying for an agent. Yes, I did. I did not have high hopes for getting an agent because you're writing about zombies and vampires in this era. It was 2016 when I was querying this novel, and I queried in total 60 agents and small presses, and I started out with big famous agents, and then I started going to agents that I hadn't heard of as much, and then I started going to small presses that didn't require an agent, and just trying and seeing, and there were a few people that were interested but eventually passed for whatever reason, and a few of the small presses did make me offers. There was a romance small press that offered, but they told me I had to add romance to the story, so I did not take that offer. There was one that made me an offer but said I would have to cut out Scott and Leif's points of view and just make it all from Emily's point of view, which that wasn't the book I wrote, so I did not take that offer. I was not surprised that no agent wanted to represent me. Even the agents that told me, they said, this book is so up my alley, it's all the things I like. I wasn't surprised that they didn't think they could market it and make money off of it, because even if an agent loves your book 100%, if they don't think they can make money off of it, why would they work on it? It's a waste of their time. And in this market, selling zombies and vampires is a hard sell. Unless you're doing something really fresh and original and a new twist on them. And the whole concept of my book was taking pop culture tropey ideas and having fun with those. So I'm writing this at the wrong time. If I had finished this book 8 years ago, the same year I started it, maybe I would have had better luck, but nah. I am hoping that the whole Good Omens coming out gives a whole new resurgence and interest in Horsemen of the Apocalypse type stuff, so maybe I will be having good timing with this release, but otherwise it was a much better fit for a genre niche press like Falstaff Books, who publishes spooky monster books, which is exactly what this is, and I fit right in there. It is right in their wheelhouse. And I am so happy and lucky to have found such a wonderful home for my book, because I know the people at Falstaff Books get this kind of book, and they're going to do a great job promoting it and selling it at cons and getting it out there on the web, and I hope all of you will be able to get it in your hands one way or another and enjoy it. When people ask how they can support me besides joining my Patreon, buying this book when it comes out, but even if you can't buy it, reading it somehow and talking about it and telling your friends about it. And if this sounds like the kind of book that you would be interested in, if you like books about monsters with feelings, figuring out their relationships while going on adventures and fighting a lot of zombies with lots of guns, then maybe this is the book for you. If it doesn't sound like the book for you, no harm done. There is a writer out there for everyone, and not every book is for everyone, and I get that. When the book does come out, the best thing you can do is leave reviews online on sites like Amazon and Goodreads, because the more reviews you leave on those sites, and this is true for all the authors you like. Like, my book's not out yet, so you can't do this for me, but do it for other authors. The more reviews you leave on Amazon, for instance, means that the higher the book will come up in the Amazon algorithm, and the more people will see it, and the better chances that author has of selling. So my good news is that my book will be out for Monsterama in Atlanta, October 4th. Obviously, not all of you can go to Monsterama in Atlanta and buy my book directly from the publisher, but you can buy it online, and then it will be in other places after that. In Charlotte, North Carolina, I know it will be in local bookstores, and so will I. So I'll see you then, and I will give you another video update when I have a cover to show you, when pre-order links are available, so stay tuned. Haha, it's a video, you can't. But I love you. Thank you so much for all your questions. I wish I could answer them all, but I know I've gone on long enough already, and I'm talking a mile a minute. So, good night. Talk to you soon.